Welcome to Trinity Radio in a very special edition as we are looking forward, looking ahead to the upcoming presidential election in the United States. And as that is the case, we have brought on some men to discuss some of the pertinent issues. Primarily, Christians may have the question about whether it is permissible for them as informed and consistent Christians to vote for the Harris Walz ticket. And so today what we're going to do is talk about that. We have two incredible speakers here, Dr. Tim Stratton and Dr. Randal Rouser. I could talk about all their achievements and their background, but I think many of our listeners probably know who these men are. And we're not going to spend too much time getting ready to get into the discussion. We're going to try to just get right into it. This is an informal debate. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow both men to have a brief time of kind of opening statements, though these are just opening statements that have not been prepared through a long academic process over weeks. These are things that they've just thought to say and written down in preparation over the past few hours, perhaps, or a couple of days. And so I'm looking forward to this. This is the kind of debate that if it were happening on someone else's channel, I would still be right there in the chat right now, ready to hear what's going to be said. But before we begin, I will just briefly let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Dr. Rouser. Thank you so much for being with us today. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before we begin?
Oh, I'd like to say to you, Braxton, thanks for hosting. Tim and Josh, thanks for participating. It's an honor to be with you guys. As the sole person, I take it, who cannot vote in the upcoming election and yet is going to have opinions about voting, as I'm Canadian. So it's good to be with you.
Yeah, that's great. And so your analysis of the matter can still inform people, even if you're not technically allowed to vote. And Tim, anything you would like to say?
Well, Braxton, thanks for having me on the show along with Josh and Randall. I've been following your work for a long time. You actually had an impact on me in my early years of studying philosophy and theology and apologetics, and I really benefited from your work and still do to this day, because you challenge a lot of the ideas that are considered normal, I guess, at times, and makes me take a step back and have to rethink some things. So thank you for your work in philosophy and theology, and I'm honored to have this conversation with you today. I know we're going to disagree, and maybe some sparks might fly a little bit, but I know that those are just iron sharpening iron sparks, and we're doing it in love and respect. And so I hope that our conversation just exudes that today and honors Christ. And I'm honored to have Josh here with me too. He's my colleague. Josh, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me crash the party a little bit. So yeah, I work with Tim, and we've been covering stuff. I have a background in ministry and in apologetics, but I'm very active in talking about, thinking about, writing about politics and that sort of thing. So from a Christian perspective. So yeah, thanks for having me on, Braxton.
Absolutely.
Next time you should bring me on for not a debate.
Yeah, you've been on twice, and both times that's what it is. All right, gentlemen. Well, let's jump right into this. Tim is kind of supporting the proposition, so we'll let him take a little space here first to lay out his case. So, Tim, why don't you go ahead and do that for us, brother?
All right. Well, again, as I already said, Randall, I want to thank you for having this important conversation with Josh and me. It's an honor to have this conversation with you, my fellow North American. And today we're discussing how Christian Americans ought to vote. But to be specific, Josh and I contend that it's impossible for an informed and consistent Christ follower to vote for Harris and Walz. And I think you disagree. I think that's why you're here. But although you mentioned that you are a Canadian who cannot vote in America's elections, you do use your voice to influence American voters. So in a sense, you are using your God-given power to advance certain ideas and policies here in America. But be that as it may, I think you and I are both going to find common ground in loving our neighbors. I know that's important to both of us. And I believe this common ground provides a foundation for us to build upon as we discuss the intersection of theology and politics today. I know that loving and protecting neighbors is what drives me. I know I speak for Josh as well. So let me set up this conversation. Many Christians realize just how evil the Democrat Party has become as it's rapidly moved to the extreme left. And to make matters worse, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the most radical left ticket to ever run for the United States presidency. Now, just so there's no confusion here, I am not a Republican. I actually left the Republican Party all the way back in 2007 because I opposed George W. Bush's leadership, not to mention that of Dick Cheney's. So I became a registered, free-thinking independent. But as an independent, it's hard to see how there is any way that an informed and consistent Christ follower could cast a vote for Harris and Walz in 2024, since the policies they advance literally bring death and destruction upon the neighbors Jesus has commanded us to love. Dr. Robert A.J. Gagnon has recently informed American Christians that a vote for Harris and Walz is a vote for the following. Braxton, please put that graphic up on the screen. A vote for Harris and Walz is a vote for the following: state-sponsored child abuse via chemical castration and surgical mutilation of confused minors, an unhindered death cult of abortion for all 9 months, including infanticide, state abduction of your minor child if parents do not support the confused child's LGBTQ identification to the state's satisfaction, the scandal and harm to females of putting males in female private spaces, bathrooms, locker rooms, showers, shelters, prisons, and sports. The list goes on, and you can read it there. It's on our website as well, and maybe we can go back and look at this. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to move on here. But each one of these evils is enough to justify being a single-issue voter. But combined, they provide a cumulative case leading to the conclusion that for any informed Christian to be consistent, he or she cannot vote for the evil policies of Harris and Walz. Indeed, these evils are far more destructive to your neighbors than anything that might have happened on January 6th. Well, consider this. God gives authority to the government to suppress evil. You see this in Romans 13. Government officials in positions of authority are called to fight evil, 1 Peter 2. In America, we the people are the ones who decide which politicians represent us and work for us. We decide who bears the sword. So, given that the American form of government instantiated by America's founders, which according to Romans, God instantiated, well, it puts we the people in charge to select who is going to suppress evil and bear the sword. We the people have a moral obligation to use our God-given voting powers to defend the oppressed, as Scripture commands, and suppress the evil, threatening our neighbors whom we are commanded to love. It's our moral duty to choose who will bear the sword and suppress evil. If your vote helps to advance evil, bringing literal death and destruction upon your neighbors, the ones you've been commanded to love, then you're in sin. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Galatians 5:14. So love your neighbor by defending and protecting your neighbor and suppressing evil. Use your God-given power wisely. Whatever you do, do not use your voting powers to advance the objective evil of Harris and Walz upon your neighbors. Consider an argument. Premise 1. Christians are commanded to suppress evil, defend the oppressed, and love neighbors. 2. If one uses their power to advance the evil set of policies of Harris and Walz, which literally brings death and destruction upon our neighbors, one has failed to suppress evil, defend the oppressed, and love neighbors. 3. Therefore, if a Christian uses their power to advance the extremely evil set of policies of Harris and Walz, the Christian has failed to suppress evil, defend the oppressed, and love neighbors. So look, this is a violation then of the one law in which Paul says sums up the entire law of Christ. This is not some secondary theological issue in which we're free to disagree. This is the top of primary theological matters and essential Christian doctrine. So it goes without saying that voting for Harris and Walz advances their objectively evil set of policies, which literally brings death and destruction upon our neighbors, who we are commanded to love. Thus, if we're going to keep the most essential law to love our neighbors, then we, the people, cannot vote for Harris and Walz. It would be a sin against both God and neighbors. So American Christians, we have a vote and a voice. Remaining silent in the face of evil is opposed to God's word. We must vocally oppose evil and definitely not vote for it. Romans 12:21 tells us clearly, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. See, we must speak out against evil in order to act against it, which includes voting against it. Leviticus 5:1 is clear that staying silent about evil is a sin for which people will be held accountable. It says, if anyone sins because they do not speak up regarding something they have seen or learned about when they become informed, then they will be held responsible. This echoes the words attributed to Bonhoeffer. To be silent in the face of evil is evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. So if you're an informed Christian and aware of the great objective evils advanced by Harris and Walz, not only will you not use your vote to help advance this great evil upon your neighbors, you will use your voice to warn the sheep, warn your neighbors, and protect the least of these. James 4:17 is clear. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So if we know that God is calling us to speak out against the evil, but we choose to be silent, we're sinning. Thus, American Christians, we the people, must use our voices to oppose Harris and Walz. If that's the case, we definitely can't vote for them. We are called to vocally oppose evil. In Isaiah 58, verse 1, God commands us to be loud and aggressive when speaking out against evil. It says, shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, to the descendants of Jacob their sins. And the book of Esther tells us the story of Queen Esther, who seeks God's guidance for how to speak out against the evil plans of the government to annihilate her people. Well, Mordecai encourages her to speak up with these words, for if you remain silent at this time, you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. American Christians, you've been given a royal position, as it were. Don't take it for granted that you are we the people. You have been blessed with God-given power. Don't squander it, but use it to protect the neighbors God has commanded you to love. Do not use your royal position to vote for evil. Instead, use your voice to oppose it. Ephesians 5:11 commands us to have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Have nothing to do with the darkness advanced by Harris and Walz. Don't vote for them, but rather expose them. Use your voice. Proverbs 31:9 tells us to speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Isaiah 1:17 commands us to learn to do right, seek justice, and defend the oppressed. Defend the oppressed. Defend the babies being slaughtered by the modern day Holocaust. Defend the indoctrinated and confused children who are being sexually and physically mutilated. Defend women from biological males seeking to invade their space. Defend your neighbors from the Marxist ideas that have killed more humans than any other evil on the face of the planet. Nothing that happened on January 6th trumps all of these grave evils that literally destroy the neighbors you've been commanded to love. As Jesus said in Matthew 23, do not ignore the greater matters of the law, lest he refer to you as a hypocrite and a blind guide. So don't use your power to cast a vote that advances more evil upon the oppressed. Instead, use your voice to defend the oppressed. So in conclusion, with these arguments in mind, along with a host of objective evils advanced by the modern day Democrat machine led by Harris and Walz, Josh and I contend that it's impossible for an informed and consistent Christ follower to vote for Harris and Walz. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tim. And we'll jump right to you, Randall. You can feel free to lay out whatever you'd like and take the time you need.
Wow, that was excellent. And so that's about 10 minutes. So I don't know if I have 10 minutes worth of content or not. We'll see however long I go.
For you, Randall, take 11.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that hospitality. I appreciate Tim saying how he's an independent. I am would definitely call myself nonpartisan. In the last several Canadian elections, I voted for NDP, Liberal, and Conservative parties at the national level, which is a reflection really across the spectrum, which is, for me, part of my philosophy of approaching things like participation in democratic systems is we have to be pragmatic. Here I'm going to quote Biden. He says, "Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative." And I think it's a good line that we have to do with every politician, right? Is to say, how does this politician compare to the alternative? So I think one of the things I'll say is missing from Tim's presentation is it's I think subject to a confirmation bias objection. I'm going to take two things there. One thing is whether the things he says about Harris and Walz are accurate. That's one question. But the other is, what is the alternative? And that's what we really have to do here to consider what the alternative is in this case. The alternative, Donald Trump, is a convicted felon 34 times over. He's a fraudster. I can say more about that. He's a sexual predator. He was found liable for sexual abuse against E. Jean Carroll, which the judge said met the colloquial definition of rape. So he's a rapist. He has evinced consistently a love of dictators, an interest in fascism, a contempt for democratic systems. He's acted to stoke racial tension and promote xenophobia. I'm going to give multiple examples of all those, I think, as we go. I certainly can. When it was the 1990s, evangelicals were very clear in their moral vision that character matters. When it came to Bill Clinton, I want to say character still matters, and the character of the person that you put into office matters. Now, Tim quoted from Robert Gagnon, giving Gagnon's claims about what Kamala Harris represents. I would say, rather than just go to Gagnon for his interpretation, go to kamalaharris.com, which would seem to be a good place to see what she's actually promoting and standing for. And the list includes cut taxes for middle-class families, make rent more affordable, grow small business, take on bad actors, strengthen and bring down the cost of healthcare, promote, strengthen Social Security and Medicare, support American innovation and workers, provide a pathway to the middle class, invest in affordable healthcare, childcare, and long-term care, and lower energy costs and tackle the climate crisis. That sounds like not a perfect agenda, perhaps, but a pretty good one. And she's got actual policies for each one of those things. Contrast that, for example, with Donald Trump, who for 9 years now has saying he's going to bring something to replace Obamacare. And for 9 years, he's been saying, oh, it's just 2 weeks away, and he's never provided anything. That's one example of the dearth of policy that one finds in Donald Trump. Now, I'm going to say something about character and conscience. So Tim wants to put the Christian into a position where they are really morally obliged, if they're going to participate in the democratic system in this election, that they have to vote for Trump on pain of essentially sin, it sounds like, if they are informed about that. And I think it's just far more complicated than that. The first thing I want to say here is when Martin Luther at Worms, he gave his famous speech to the emperor, he said at the end, I neither can nor will retract anything, for it cannot be either safe or honest for a Christian to speak against his conscience. Here I stand, God help me, amen. And I think there's some wise words there, a recognition of the way that the conscience, or the Holy Spirit, we might say, speaks to particular individuals and how we are beholden to what the Spirit lays upon our hearts and how we should vote and participate in the democratic system. One example of this that I love is about 15 years ago, Tom McCall was in a debate with John Piper in the Trinity Journal about Calvinism versus Arminianism. And at one point, Piper made what I thought was a stunning concession. He said to McCall, when McCall raised moral objections to the content of theological content of Calvinism, Piper said, you ought not accept my views, because to do that would be to go against your conscience. I think he's right about that. And I think that much more if a person has a moral confliction about voting for someone they believe to be a xenophobe, a racist who stokes racial tension, who dehumanizes and objectifies immigrants and refugees, who himself has evinced in his public life a history of criminality for which he has repeatedly gone to trial and been found guilty. The Trump Foundation, which was ostensibly a charitable organization, Trump was channeling the money in the Trump Foundation into promoting his own businesses. The Trump Foundation was shut down by the government, and he had to pay $2 million in restitution. Trump University was shut down as a fraud, and they had to pay something like $20 million to the students that they had defrauded. Last year, Trump was found to have inflated the property values for getting loans of his properties in New York, and then to understated them or deflated them when paying property taxes. And he was fined over $350 million by the judge. So this is an example of Trump's ongoing history of criminality. It goes back to the 1970s when Trump was investigated by the FBI for refusing to rent his apartments to Black people. And they settled in 1975 on that. There's a long history of that. And then, of course, in terms of the history of sexual abuse, it's not just E. Jean Carroll. There are 28 women currently who have outstanding claims that Trump has engaged in sexual harassment or sexual abuse against them. I often hear people saying, "Oh, well, they're just out to get money or to get rich." None of these people have received money from Trump. What they've received is death threats. I am a workplace investigator. I investigate people who make claims of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. As the FBI says, in their statistics, approximately 7% of claims of sexual harassment or sexual abuse or rape are not legitimate. They're fabricated. Just from that alone, let alone the fact that Trump himself has bragged about sexual assault in the Access Hollywood tape. He bragged about grabbing women by the genitals. He said, when you're famous, they let you do anything. That is the person that you're suggesting a Christian is morally obliged to vote for. So I will state that my general incredulity with the thesis you're defending there. I'm going to say one quick thing about abortion because I don't want to go over time, but I know that we can come back to it. It's important. So, for example, I question Robert Gagnon being a reliable narrator of Kamala Harris's views because Kamala Harris is advocating a return to Roe v. Wade, which was access to elective abortion in the first trimester and restrictions after that could be decided by the states, but still allowing certainly for abortion in the case of the health of the mother. That's what she's advocating for, a return to is Roe v. Wade. It's Trump who said falsely at his debate with Harris a month ago that she supports abortion up to the 9th month and even after birth, which is an absurd claim, which she refuted herself within the debate. Now, it could be, I don't know if Trump knows this or not, if he's thinking about this, it could be that he's talking about laws where there are failed abortions and the child is born alive. Can the physician help the child at that point? But that is not what he said. He did not refer to that. He referred to after birth, parturition, not from simply a failed abortion. That is a clear equivocation. He's giving people the impression, as he said, up to and after the 9th month of pregnancy, which is infanticide, which does not happen. It is precisely that kind of disinformation that makes it very difficult often for people to counteract the kinds of defenses of Trump. And voting for Trump. But to conclude with this, I'm not advocating for voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I'm advocating for the fact against Tim's proposition that you are morally obliged, if you are informed as a Christian, to vote for Donald Trump. And I'm saying, based upon the balance of these two people that we're not comparing against the Almighty, a person in their Christian conviction may indeed conclude that they should vote for Harris Walz.
All right. Thank you, guys. Both of those were excellent. And now let's just move right into a time of discussion.
Cool. The first thing I'll say is while I have argued elsewhere that I believe, given the extreme evils of the advanced by the Harris and Walz campaign, that we need that it's prudent to vote for Trump. In fact, I would say we have Josh and I wrote an article called "A Moral Obligation to Vote for an Immoral Candidate," where we agree with you, Randall. He is an immoral candidate with bad character, but the policies of the other side are so evil that they bring tremendous death and destruction upon our neighbors. So if it's character versus, I agree, character counts, but with Jesus' words in mind to the Pharisees when he says, you failed to consider the greater and more weightier matters of the law. And then he calls them hypocrites and blind guides. I think death and destruction to our neighbors trumps, no pun intended, trumps bad character. But let me back up. I mean, the topic for debate today isn't what I have argued elsewhere. And I did argue just a few days ago and debated Jonathan Pritchett on this very channel on that topic. But Braxton did want us to debate the topic of if it's possible for an informed and consistent Christ follower to actually cast a vote, use their power to advance the evil of Harris Tim Walz. So while I would, if you want to, it sounds like you're close to maybe agreeing with me on that topic. If we could agree on that, I would be willing to go to the next step and have that conversation that might be more interesting. But Randall, why don't you, I think Josh would probably have some stuff he'd like to say in response to your opening statement. But before Josh does that, Randall, what do you think of what I just said?
The part about policy trumping bad character?
Policy that brings death and destruction upon your neighbors seems to be more important.
I mean, it's kind of like how often do you beat your wife, the way that you framed it. I think it's a little tendentious in the way that you framed it. And the reason is twofold. The reason is twofold. So first of all, abortion is a complex issue. For example, yesterday in a speech, Kamala Harris said, Donald Trump is the architect. Women are being denied health care during miscarriages, some only being treated once they develop sepsis. And tragically, because of these bans, some women have even died. And that is true. So the same day yesterday, ProPublica reported that in 2021, Josille Barnica, a pregnant woman in Texas, was suffering a miscarriage at 17 weeks pregnancy. The doctors could not advance the miscarriage through an abortion because the fetus still had a fetal heartbeat. So they had to wait for the fetus to die naturally, which led to her developing sepsis over 40 hours and dying. That is the practical consequence. That's one practical consequence. Here's another one. In 2022, you may have heard this case. There was a 10-year-old girl in Ohio who was impregnated by a 27-year-old man named Gerson Fuentes. And she was over the 6-week limit for abortion within Ohio. So she could not get an abortion in Ohio as a 10-year-old who had been raped. Now, are you saying that a Christian could not think that in those cases, a person should have access to abortion and therapeutic abortion in those cases?
Josh, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so this is like a common tactic of let's use the fringes to be okay with whatever Harris and Walz say. I can play into that a little bit. Many of the cases are a result of botched either home abortions or using the using the abortion pill, like the case in Georgia, using the abortion pill from a different state without doctoral supervision. And generally speaking, in those cases, now I haven't followed the Ohio case, so I don't remember exactly how that one fell. But if it is, again, pursuant to life of the mother, the 10-year-old would fall under, her hips aren't wide enough. She's not old enough to actually carry to term with her life to be able to be intact. So she might have to terminate the pregnancy. I don't see how terminating a pregnancy, killing a baby, killing an unborn infant, because something bad happened is just. I don't see ethically how that is just. Killing something because of someone else's bad actions is just. And this idea that miscarriages are being mishandled by hospitals because of abortion law is either bad medical care from abortion law, because even in the law in Texas, that outright states, that law in Texas, that if it's not an elective abortion, if it's not elective, if it is a miscarriage, then a DNC procedure is not only allowed but necessary. So doctors not doing their duty because they misunderstand the law does not negate the fact that the law might be a good law. We need better training for those doctors then, not looser laws so that more babies can be killed. So those outstanding circumstances, I think, often when we argue in the margins, so that we can prove the middle. I just don't think that's good or accurate. And Harrison Walz, she has not ever come out and said she's against abortion in the third trimester. She's never said it. She won't say it. Anytime she's asked, she has punted the question. She hasn't responded. She won't say it. She's constantly lied about Donald Trump's position. I don't like his position, but she's lied about his position on abortion being of signing a federal abortion ban continuously. So her character's first truth telling and Walz's character's first truth telling is at least similar, if not the same as Trump in their history. And so I just don't find those arguments convincing one way or the other, because I find abortion to be morally abhorrent and needs to be eradicated. And I wish Trump shared my sentiment, but he doesn't. My question then to you, Randall, is do you think a Christian can, within good conscience, vote for somebody that is not just pro-choice, but is actively pro-abortion? Not, hey, we want to keep it safe, legal, and rare, not that, but actively pro-abortion to the tune of bringing an abortion mobile to the Democrat National Convention, to the tune of refusing to say no to abortions during the third trimester, to the tune of Tim Walz signing legislation in Minnesota that makes it so that you don't have to provide palliative or restorative care to botched abortions. And 8 botched abortion infants have died, 5 of them because they were refused that palliative care. You can find that on the Minnesota government website. Is it okay to vote for somebody that holds that extreme of a position?
Thanks, Josh. So first of all, I just want to come back to your opening was that I'm engaged in a common tactic. It's not a tactic. This is not a game for me, and it's not a battle. What I am saying is these are nuanced issues, and the laws as they now exist have practical effects. And some of the effects are that women have died and children have been denied abortion. And you said just now, as I understand your position, you believe a 10-year-old should, if she is raped, carry the child to term. Fair enough, that's your position. I hope that you would concede how a Christian could in good conscience disagree with that position. One of the challenges here when we're talking about abortion...
I'm sorry.
Yeah. One of the challenges when we're talking about abortion is there are strong intuitions, and I think are widely held within society, that there is ontological development in utero during gestation, such that to end the life of the human organism, let's say 8 days post-fertilization, is morally different than ending that same life 2 hours before birth or parturition. And one way to just very common thought experiment to track with that intuition is to give the old thought experiment. If the building is on fire and in one room there is one infant, and down the hall in the other room there are 100 fertilized embryos, and the firefighter only has time to get to the one room and save the infant, or to the other room and save the 100 fertilized embryos, which room do they go to? And most people have the intuition that they ought to save the infant before the 100 fertilized embryos. But if they are equal ontologically, then that makes no sense, because you ought to save the 100 over the 1 if you're given that terrible decision. But I think there are strong intuitions that many people have that are widely held that you ought to save the 1 before the 100. And that the longer you go through pregnancy, the weightier the moral issues are. That's one of the points I want us to appreciate here. Not only do you have therapeutic dimensions to abortion, such as rape, such as not just the quote unquote life of the mother, but the health and well-being of the woman. But you also have the ontological development of the fetus in utero throughout pregnancy, and the growing moral weight of what is required for a justification of abortion to occur. So that would be my response, is that these are complex issues. And then lastly, again, when a person has to make those decisions, they also have to decide whatever they find with respect to Harrison Walz over against all the things Donald Trump stands for and represents, and then make the decision. You can't consider the question like abortion just in isolation of all the other things that relate to each of these parties when you're casting a vote.
Yeah. That's a great point. But that's why I did offer on that slide Braxton, maybe you could put that back up again. It's not considered an isolation. And we're not talking about Harris or Walz's character here. It's only about these policies that have a real impact on the neighbors you've been commanded to love. And so I think Harris and Walz actually have horrible character. But I don't care about their character. I mean, I do. Character counts. But I care about policies that impact the neighbors we're called to defend. We're called to be salt. That means we are supposed to slow the decay of our culture as well. And we do that by suppressing evil. We can't stop evil completely, but we have to suppress it. And God used some people with some really shady character to do some pretty awesome things, and to, for His glory. I look at Samson, for example, and even David. We could go on and on and on. I mean, Paul was the chief of sinners, but I think I agree with you that abortion is a complex issue. Yes, it sounds to me like you're actually, a lot of American Christians are frustrated. A lot of the pro-life Christians today are frustrated with Trump because he isn't as pro-life as they are. It sounds like you're kind of on the same page as Trump, to tell you the truth. What do you think about that?
I do think it's ironic that that people who are ostensibly pro-life are so militant about voting for Trump, given that this is like an abolitionist voting for someone who says, let the states decide whether they should own slaves. So I do agree that Trump does not have a very consistent pro-life position at all. Now, in terms of when you talk about diminishing the value of character, here's the thing, however, if the person evinces in their character a contempt for democracy, then it is probably not a good thing to give them a lot of power. And Trump consistently evinces contempt for democracy. He talked about Kim Jong-un, how they exchanged love letters. He praised Rodrigo Duterte when he was asked which world leader in the last debate with Harris, which world leader do you like or looks up to you? He right away says Viktor Orban. He says Chairman Xi, he praised him from China because he is a brilliant guy who rules with a, quote, iron fist. In 1990, he praised the strength of the Chinese when they put down forcibly the Tiananmen Square uprising. And with Putin, of course, he has a long history of praise for Putin. It was just revealed by Bob Woodward in his new book that during COVID, when Americans could not get COVID testing kits, he sent COVID testing kits secretly to Putin. Trump, has said in 2016, before the election, that he will accept the results, quote, if I win. And that has been his consistent position. He will accept the results of a Democratic election only if he wins. In 2020, after he lost, he called Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, and he asked him to, quote, find 11,780 votes. This is mob behavior. In January 6th, now I know that you've cited Robert Gagnon saying January 6th, oh, it's not the big deal, etc. I would commend people read the 45-page indictment against Trump, which was signed by a grand jury for his actions, not just in January 6th, but from November through to January. Trump has since said about January 6th, these are political prisoners. They are not. They were rioters. They broke into the Capitol. They beat police. They wiped feces on the wall, and they called for Pence to be hanged. That's why Pence doesn't want to be Trump's running mate and need to replace a Pence with a Vance. He's also called them political prisoners. He jokes about becoming authoritarian. He said in July 2024, in 4 years, you won't have to vote again. He attacks the media as the, quote, enemy of the people. That is fascistic terminology. He referred to journalists this week as scum. He refers to his critics, including specifically Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, as, quote, enemies among us. Again, that's fascistic language. He refers to his opponents as vermin. That is dehumanizing, objectifying language. He's called for violence against his opponents and hecklers in 2016. He called for a heckler to have the crap knocked out of him. He said he would pay for the legal bills of people who physically assaulted hecklers at his rallies. In this month, he said, go home to mommy to a heckler and said, get the hell knocked out of her. In 2022, Mark Esper said that Trump was saying about BLM protesters and Mark Esper was Trump's former Pentagon chief. He had said that Trump said, quote, "Can't you just shoot them in the legs or something?" Trump's generals who worked with him, John Kelly, his former chief of staff, said that he praised Hitler and said Hitler did some good things too. Mark Milley said that Trump is fascist to the core. He was the joint chairman, chief of staff. Jim Mattis, who was Trump's four-star general and U.S. Secretary of Defense, said Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to. Instead, he tries to divide us. So I don't want to harangue you, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that Trump is contemptuous of democracy and that he views authoritarian power as something to be desired. And if he has no character, as you concede, then I think to give him the keys to the kingdom to continue to undermine our democracy is just self-defeating.
So real quick, I just want to step in real quick here and say that Randall spoke for a while there, but he's up against two guys who each spoke for a little bit. So, but if you guys want to just go back and forth more in a kind of rapid fire or a little bit more or less verbose, that might be good.
Okay, I don't want to necessarily interrupt. I want to let people say things. That it's kind of hard to respond to every single thing you said there. There's multiple responses that I would give to a lot of those claims, because frankly, if a few of them I think have been debunked, as far as and a few of them are just spurious, like as whether or not they are actually true. So I'm not actually going to address all of those. People can go research those if they want. Now, I am struck by, and I suppose maybe your response is, well, it's a choice between two. So if you're saying a Christian can't vote for Kamala Harris, you're saying they have to vote for the other one. But the contention is a consistent and informed Christian can't vote for Kamala Harris. Now, I suppose you could say, if that Christian is convinced that Donald Trump is going to be some sort of fascist dictator and eliminate our democracy, dissolve the Supreme Court, and make the United States the USSRA or whatever, then maybe you could say you have to throw some of the things that we said about Harris out the window to oust Trump in that sense. And I'm prepared to have that discussion. But what I haven't heard is really a defense of why, if Harris holds these positions that seem to be antithetical to biblical values, these policies, why voting for her would be consistent with somebody who holds a Christian worldview. It could be perfectly consistent to look, as there have been, and Tim and I have had kind of some debates ourselves about whether or not withholding a vote or voting third party. He's much more staunch on it than I am. There is an option to say, as a Christian, well, I am not going to vote for either because my allegiance is to God, and neither of these candidates are going to be good for the country. One espouses values that are antithetical to Scripture. One has bad character, has really morally questionable past and character. Well, they both kind of do, but maybe if you put them on the weight, Trump's is weightier to that person's mind. So then they would bow out. So there is that option for the Christian that finds the both untenable. So the question has been, is there a way to be consistent and proactively vote for the Harris Walz ticket? And then my question was, is it consistent as a Christian who believes that life begins at conception to vote for the Harris Walz ticket that is radical on abortion? It just is radical on abortion.
Not to mention the transing mutilation of confused kids and things like that as well.
My curtain here is messed up, so I'm all like...
yeah. So first of all, I'm going to acknowledge, like going through my list of facts, and I got a lot of other ones like them. It's a little bit of a gish gallop, so that's not meant to be. I just got a lot of stuff that I want to get through. I
didn't want to accuse you of a gish gallop. I just wasn't wanting to address all of them. Yeah.
And you didn't. I would be interested if you actually have evidence of things that I've said that are false to specifically identify what they are. But I do think it's important to get a pattern there. And so when I see there's a pattern for 10 years of Trump having contempt for democracy, I've got a similar pattern I'd be happy to bring you through for Trump's language of xenophobia. of racism and dehumanizing rhetoric about immigrants and refugees. So if we're concerned about the Bible and what the Bible has to say, the Bible has a rather lot to say about how we treat the least of these, including refugees, including immigrants. So why don't I talk of some examples from that? Of course, Trump launched his campaign against Mexican immigrants 9 years ago by saying they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Now, that language, I mean, is clearly meant to.
Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at your Trump impression. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not. Look, it's not. I'm not going to be on Saturday Night Live anytime soon. But I mean, this is a way of just broadly smearing a group and say, well, I assume some aren't rapists or bringing crime. He's talked in 2018 repeatedly about quote unquote caravans of migrants. Now, this was clearly from August up to November. This was up to the midterm elections. He was stoking fear about migrant caravans coming to the border. It's a common theme he has about promoting the idea of the United States being invaded. He's recently been doing that by talking about gangs of people, Latin Americans taking over cities in Ohio and Colorado, Aurora. I have family in Aurora. There's no problems there. There's something issue with one building, but the city's not being taken over. In 2018, and if I just give a couple more examples, 2018, January, he talked in a bipartisan senators meeting about African countries and also Haiti and El Salvador as being shithole countries, and that he wanted more immigrants from Norway. He referred to the COVID-19 virus as Kung Flu, which was that kind of rhetoric was part of the reason there was a spike of hate crimes against Asians in 2020. He's talked since 2023 December about immigrants poisoning the blood of our country. He's talked about immigrants having bad genes in October, like this month. He said, you know, a murderer, it's in their genes. We've got a lot of bad genes in our country right now. With the Haitians, of course, we know these are people that were brought into the United States legally to work in Ohio. He promotes an old trope, a racist trope about migrants eating weird food. This is the thing when I was growing up, that kids on the playground would say that the local Chinese restaurant serves cat and dog meat. That was just outright racism. And that's what he does when he says, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live there. That is a clear appeal to a racist trope. Mm-hmm. And you know what happened? Schools in Springfield, Ohio were getting bomb threats because of that kind of crap. And the mayor of the city was begging Trump and Vance to stop spreading that dehumanizing, objectifying, anti-migrant and immigrant rhetoric. Now, that is pretty profoundly contrary to Christian principles, in my view.
Now, before you guys respond, Randall, I could imagine someone saying something like, okay, well, Randall, maybe you're convincing me that it would be a sin for a Christian to vote for Donald Trump, but that doesn't tell me whether or not it's a sin to vote for Harris Walz. Now, I'm not asking you to respond to that now. I'd be interested to hear what the guys have to say about what you just said about Trump. But just in the interest of, moving it toward the debate topic, I wanted to add that into the discussion.
There's a few things there. One, like with the Haitian migrants thing, technically they're temporary protected status. So they weren't brought to the country legally. They are illegal immigrants that were granted temporary protected status by the Harris admin through just an online app that anybody can have access to. So
but that's legal.
The Harris admin made that legal, temporary protected status. So the argument is that shouldn't be legal. We shouldn't just be granting people temporary protected status and then shipping them places. I mean, that town's a town of 60,000 people, median income 20,000. Regardless of and I would agree, Trump's repeating of that rhetoric. Now, he was repeating what Vance had reported to him by people in the area. It wasn't like he just made it up. That at least they claim that people had told them that. And there's actually video evidence of somebody at a city council in Springfield saying that they saw that, and the city manager saying, well, but we just don't have proof. So it's not like he just made that up whole cloth. He had reports and he believed the reports, and maybe he was too quick to believe them and he should have just said, I'm not going to say that. When he said that, I was like, oh, please, come on, don't do that. Like, don't say that. That's ridiculous. so I'm not one that's defending the fact that he said it. But it's not like he just decided to make it up. But it is true that Springfield has been put through the ringer as far as this amount of Haitian migrants that has been brought in there for jobs. The homeless community there has suffered. There's been people that have lost housing because of it. It's been a very difficult issue. Trump and Vance shed a light on it in a very poor way. But the argument is people shouldn't be just given protected status if they've broken the law by coming to the country just because they filled out something on an app. It's okay to have borders. It's okay to say we ought to have legal immigration. It's okay to actually pick and choose who's going to come into your country. None of that is anti-biblical. Now, I agree that a Christian ought to treat anybody, whether they're here legally or illegally, with respect and dignity and love and care. But I'm talking about policy-wise. You can't just open the gates and allow anybody to claim asylum and then get in and release them into the interior. And that's kind of Trump's immigration policy. He explains it with hyperbolic rhetoric. That's what he always does. But if you ratchet down to what his policies are beyond the rhetoric that tends to be hyperbolic, you see that those policies, generally speaking, are good policies for the country. As for the kids in cages, that was policy that was enacted under Obama and then enforced under Trump. Should they have enforced it? Maybe, maybe not. But that was not a unique policy to Donald Trump as far as immigration goes. And then lastly, I don't want to belabor the point, but I still want to just ask the question. And I can only be here for a few more minutes. So sorry for me filibustering for this last little bit of time. I've asked the question multiple times, regardless of how if a person's caught in the middle and I'm not sure I'm going to vote for Trump. I'm not sure if I'm going to vote for Harris. But they have these stances, and I've asked a couple times, and you haven't responded to it. So again, just if a Christian who understands life to begin at conception looks at the two platforms, can they be consistent with that belief and vote for a party that is not just pro leave it to the states, but pro-federalizing abortion and allowing the type of abortion that could be federalized into like third trimester late abortion? It seems to me that Harris and Walz have at least tacitly admitted that would be that would be the platform that they would use in abortion. Is it consistent for a Christian to vote for that?
There's two different issues here. So one issue is what Walz or Harris has actually said about abortion. And when I've heard her speak on it, she's consistently said a return to Roe v. Wade, not something beyond Roe v. Wade. And I've already defined what Roe v. Wade is. It's elective abortion in the first trimester, not the third trimester. Second question, separate to that, could a Christian conceivably support a position where a politician supported abortion in the third trimester, elective abortion in the third trimester, who is not Harris, but somebody else? And I guess at that point, I'm back to that pragmatism. What are the options? What are the alternatives? What is the alternative of the other person? Who are they? What are they endorsing? Is it even worse? Because I would not support the ethics, or I would not support the legality of elective abortion in the third trimester. I am one of those people that believes there is ontological development, and thus the moral weight of killing a fetus increases over time, and the moral justification for it is increased over time. While I would support elective, or you could call it therapeutic abortion of, let's say, a conceptus that is a result of a rape in the first trimester, I would not in the third trimester, for example. But my point is, these are precisely the kinds of issues that a Christian has to use their conscience and reflect on it prayerfully, read scripture, talk with others, understand the policies, understand the full orb of the agendas of each respective party, and then make their decision. I don't think it's helpful to say you have to take this view rather than that view. And I think that kind of single issue approach to voting is not helpful, especially when you try to say that anybody who disagrees with my single issue approach to voting is not being a faithful Christian.
But we have not given us, it's not a single issue. I gave on that list.
To be fair, I've been pressing a single issue.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I was responding to Josh. I take your
got it. Yep. So, Josh, I know you don't have much more time, so I'll just give you all my time until you have to leave.
Okay. I don't know what happened to my curtain, but like the sun, I don't know if it's like
We don't have to see you that well, Josh.
Yeah.
We just have to hear you.
you don't want either. Okay, yeah. So it seems to me. So your position then is that there are two options and you need to choose one. Is that the position? Like you ought to vote for one?
No, I mean you could have a conviction to vote for a third party, as I mean you'd referenced with Tim. You may have a conviction to spoil your ballot. You may have a conviction not to participate at all. What I don't think you can justify is mere sloth about the participation in democracy. What I think you have to do is you have to have reasoned positions, and that could result in a multiplicity of actions that are all defensible in principle in accord with Christian conviction.
Okay, and I think we can all agree on that much, that we should try to be as informed as possible, and it doesn't matter where you're getting your news sources from. There were a few things you mentioned about Trump, the liability, the case in the 70s. Obviously, do you think someone's disposition towards people of other races can change over time?
Yeah, but I also think that there's a consistent pattern of him engaging in racist actions.
Okay.
So that's why it's part of a pattern. It's not like, oh, he did this one racist thing in the 70s, and that's all evidence I have of that. It's not that.
So when I read on the case in the 70s, they obviously settled out of court, but they settled with no admission. What goes with the settlement is no admission of guilt, and what came with the settlement was basically an admission that they would not factor in race as far as part of their application process, which Donald Trump says was already what they were doing. They were simply denying access to people based on their credit scores and whether or not they would be able to pay back those loans. So that's one case. And I find it interesting, like the race, the xenophobia thing, and maybe it's just because he wasn't so much in the public eye politically, but that didn't seem to be an issue for Donald Trump in the public sphere from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000 teens until about, like 2015. It didn't seem to be something that people called him.
I disagree. So, for example, in 1989 or 90, I forget the year, he had a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five. Of course, they were vindicated by DNA, and the guy who actually did it was convicted, I think, in 2002. Trump, over the last 22 years, has refused.
Yeah, but he didn't.
He refused to retract that, has continued to say they should have been executed. And then the biggest thing here is...
But do you have evidence that he did that based on their race? Maybe he just really thought they were guilty and got away with it.
Maybe it's possible, but we have to look at a balance of probabilities as what we think is the most likely interpretation of his actions. Why is it that in 2012, Trump says, Obama, why was he born in the US? No. And he promotes a birther conspiracy that, in fact, he was born overseas. Why Obama? Now, you could say, oh, maybe he was just happened to be Obama. Or you could say maybe Trump's a little bit racist. This is the guy that at one of his rallies, he sees a black man in the audience. He says, oh, there's my African-American over there. He has this othering, dehumanizing, objectifying way about talking about other people. Why is it that this comedian, everybody's talking about this comedian talking about the Puerto Rico as an island of garbage? That same comedian, nobody's talking about this, said, oh, I was with my black friend for Halloween and we were carving watermelons. So another racist trope. Nobody's even talking about that. Now, don't tell me that Trump's people don't know who they're putting up there and the kinds of things that they're going to say. This is the long history of Trump engaging in this kind of rhetoric.
And I could agree that the comedian was a bad, like, don't bring a roast comedian to a, like, I agree. Don't bring a roast comedian to a rally. That's kind of a silly thing to do. But I mean, this comedian was at the roast of Tom Brady, making the exact same jokes, made an incredibly racist joke about what's his name? The comedian, short. He's short, usually with the Rock.
Hart.
I can't remember.
Hart.
Kevin Hart made an incredibly racist joke about Kevin Hart. Everyone's cackling up because they know it's a roast. Don't bring a roast comedian. and Trump says he doesn't know who the guy is. I have no doubt that Trump doesn't, because I don't think Trump. I agree. I don't think Trump really cares about a lot of people outside of his own circle. I do think he's narcissistic. I'm not here to defend his character or all the statements. I do think he's a brash New Yorker who says a lot of things. But in the end, I look at most of his governing actions, and I find that the policies were effectual and worked out well for the American people. And I would love to continue this conversation, because I've really appreciated, Randall, your disposition and the way you've handled the dialogue back and forth. I hope you don't feel attacked by me. I don't feel attacked by you. It's been really, really fun. Unfortunately, it is my daughter's birthday, so I do have to sign off. After that, I don't mean to leave after a salvo, so I'm sorry about that, but I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Well, we should do this more. We should. I would love to continue having these conversations and others with you, Randall. You're very respectful, even in disagreement, and fun to talk to. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Happy birthday to your daughter, and happy Reformation Day as well.
Yes, absolutely. See you guys.
All right. See you, Josh.
Okay, so I'm perfectly happy with us continuing to discuss this issue of, comparing the candidates and that sort of thing. But it sounds like, from what I understand of you, Randall, and what you've said here, you think that at least when it comes to the issue of abortion, you think that an informed and consistent Christian could vote Harris Walz, because the abortion that is allowed for provided for if Roe were back in place would be one that you think is sensible of a complex issue where there's ontological development, and it still gives certain rights to the states. Do we want to keep talking about the comparison of the two candidates, or do we want to push deeper into the question of whether a consistent, knowledgeable Christian can vote Harris Walz on perhaps for other reasons? Tim, why don't you tell me what your thoughts are there?
Well, I think both questions are important. Maybe we should start with the resolution or the contention here of can an informed and consistent Christ follower actually use their vote, which is using their power to help advance the evil policies of Harris and Walz. So as of right now, I am not taking the position that I've argued elsewhere, that I've argued with right here on this channel, that Christians have a moral obligation to actually cast a vote for an immoral candidate like Trump, which puts us in a weird position. But I do think that's defensible. But I'm just really more concerned now, given the policies, and I gave 15. I wish Josh was still here, because if you were to press me on him, he said I can back each one of these up from liberal sources. So maybe we'll ask him to share those in the comments below, and maybe Braxton, you can put it in the description. But we do we've got two articles, one called a moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate, and then the other is open letters to my never Trump friends, or something like that. And in that latter one, I know we had around 85 footnotes and many more links, so we tried to really be thorough and to back up these things, even each of these claims from Gagnon. So with that said, I think, if we look at, abortion is one thing. And even if I were to concede and agree with you, Randall, for the sake of, again, this is just for the sake of argument, if I were to agree and take your position on abortion, I was listening to Elon Musk yesterday, or a couple days ago, and he said, look, can we at least agree that if a baby could survive outside the womb, you can't kill it? And that seems like a reasonable place to start. I think we should start there. But I don't think, you've said that Harris wants to bring it only back to the first trimester, but that's not the way it's been, how abortion has been run in America, even before Roe got overturned. And when she has been pressed to ask for where should you draw the line, she doesn't give it, at least not in live conversations. I'm not in a position to back that up right now, so let people fact check me. But I know Josh said he was ready to defend it. But let's put abortion to the side and add, really, fathers. I think what really has split this country is the not the gay marriage thing, but the transing of kids. There seems to be some indoctrination going on, which confuses young kids. And then the adults are like, well, they can't get tattoos before they're 18. They can't join the military when they're 10. But hey, Tommy is telling us that he's a little girl. Well, let's cut his stuff off. And whether it be chemical castration or surgical mutilation, I mean, this stuff is going on right now, and that just seems satanic to me. And this is the stuff that is being advanced by the modern day Democrat machine led by Harris and Walz. And on top of that, I'm willing to have a conversation on Marxism. We can connect the dots that Harris and Walz and the Democrat machine today has close ties with Marxism. So if we want to say that Trump is fascist, we can just as easily, in fact, I'd say with more justification, say, well, Harris is Marxist. And if we want to compare the two, seems to be like, it's factual. Marxism has killed far more people than fascism ever did, and always leads to death and destruction historically. And once you go there, it necessarily leads to dictatorship and a loss of freedom and a loss of democracy. So I find it odd and kind of crazy that Trump's always the one being compared to the dictator, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I do think we can accuse the other side of the same thing, and I think there's even more justification for it.
So, Tim, you've laid out two things there: the Marxism and the trans issue. So, can we take those one at a time? And we don't have a lot of time left. By the way, we're going to end in probably about the next 20 minutes or so. And so, if you have questions, put those in the chat to show appreciation to the super chats. We will privilege those that have given super chats, but we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. So how about the issue of transing children or kids, underage people? Let's talk about that for just a minute. Randall, what are your thoughts on what's been said so far in that?
Sure. Let me just say quickly two things. So one of the issues I think that abortion is a ethical draw here, where it's very important, is because of the numbers we're dealing with of lives, right? And so the one thing I just want to say before we talk about the trans issue is there are other topics that involve massive numbers of lives, like public health care. So there'd be a conversation there. For example, Trump in February of 2020, according to Bob Woodward, he knew already that the COVID virus was airborne, and he knew the steps they already had to take in order to try to limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And he suppressed a lot of that information, which helped to increase the death toll, which was 350,000 people by the end of 2020. It could have been much lower if Trump had taken a more aggressive stance on it. And now he's talking about putting Robert Kennedy, who's a vaccine denier, into a top healthcare place within his administration, which is pretty terrifying. If we're concerned about numbers of lives affected, we should be concerned about that, as well as climate change issues. There could be 2 billion climate refugees by the end of the century if we don't do something about current rates of carbon increase in the environment. And Trump has repeatedly been on record denying that as a human-induced climate change. Trans issues, okay. So where on KamalaHarris.com is her position on things like, you said chemical castration or physical?
I mean, that stuff is going on right now, and it's being advanced by the Democrat Party.
I'm asking where because there's a lot of disinformation out there, where in KamalaHarris.com, in her platform, is her stated position endorsing chemical castration of children?
It'd be stupid for her to actually put that on her website. I'm saying that this is a reality that's going on in this country right now, and there's much documentation.
What are you complaining? You suggested that a child is having his genitals cut off. What age? There's
top
the documentation
surgery
for that.
I'll get it to Braxton. We'll back everything up. We've got it. I don't have it with me right now. Okay. But yeah, what I'm going to say, I'm not worried about backing this stuff up. So with that said, we know that one party is advancing what I would call the trans madness right now, and another party is opposing it. So it's in the blue states. So I'm saying that the modern day Democrat machine is pushing this trans madness, which does chemically castrate. And then there's documented cases of top surgery, right? We are indoctrinating little kids and then destroying their lives forever, saying, "Oh, well, they just know that they're the opposite sex."
Okay,
but hey, they can't get a tattoo and they can't join the military. But hey, let's change their sex.
Let me offer a quick response into that, and then come to Marxism, because we probably only have 8 or so minutes on this left. Sorry, my dog might start barking here. I'm trying to keep him quiet. Okay, so there is such a thing as puberty blockers, and when children are actually, that's not true. I'm not an expert, but from what I've read, puberty blockers delay the advent of puberty. And the therapeutic justification for using puberty blockers would be in severe cases of gender dysphoria for children. And there are documented cases. A friend of mine is a psychiatrist who works with these kinds of children who experience severe gender dysphoria. And there are some kids out there who are just like, I need an identity. Okay, I'm going to be this. And they kind of gravitate to certain popular notions like, adopting new pronouns or so on because of, social pressure or the desire to be different. There are people like that. There are also kids for whom there is a severe, and it appears to be an innate response of gender dysphoria. To my mind, and I don't know, this might be incorrect, but it's kind of like body integrity disorder, where you feel like parts of your body are not yours. And the question is how therapeutically best to address the experience of severe trauma that comes with gender dysphoria. And it's a complex therapeutic question. So, I'm not sure how to address gender dysphoria in the youngest ages onwards. I do know that I'm not aware of children being operated on. I'm aware of some people justifying and advocating for the use of puberty blockers to put puberty off while children are figuring some of these things out.
The cases I've read. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I would just say for the cases, I'd need to see the documentation of what the specific cases are, because there is a lot of disinformation that is going out there about. Like Trump himself has said several times, a kid goes to school one sex in the morning and he comes back a girl in the evening. This kind of absurdity. Trump says these things.
Hey, but look, there's so much mis and disinformation on both sides. I mean, the whole Russia thing, and the which was debunked, which was all we heard about for 4 years, and then the hiding of Hunter's laptop, which probably had a real effect on the last election. I mean, let's talk
about Marxism.
Okay, let's do.
Okay, so you mentioned Marxism. So the first thing I'm going to say is that Kamala Harris has an Entrepreneurs and Innovators Policy Plan on their website. This is central to their platform. It was announced at a privately owned brewery in September, which is a new policy to develop small business entrepreneurs, innovation, and economic growth within the United States. On October 24th, the White House reported the Small Business Administration had provided a record $56 billion through more than 100,000 small business financing in fiscal year 2024, more than in the previous 15 years. So where's the Marxism here? They are massive advocates for developing small business. This is pro-capitalism.
I would encourage people to judge a candidate on their actions, not their words. And same with Trump, definitely, because I think his words are actually oftentimes bad, but his actions and the way he governs are fantastic. Kamala knows the right things to say, but her actions have not been so good, and I include the Biden administration with that. But I think I wish Josh was still here, because I asked him to have all the connections to Marxism to the Harris campaign, or to Harris and Biden and the Democrat Party today. But ultimately, Marxism leads to dictatorship, and so there obviously there's a difference between the right and the left. I mean, conservatives want individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. And the key tenets of Marxism would be things like class struggle, and we see this all the time. I mean, it's moved from class struggle to race struggles. So Marx utilized the oppressed narrative in the 1840s when he co-authored the Communist Manifesto. But today, you're going to hear that exact same language used by those who, at the top of the Black Lives Matter organization. And who are they voting for, right? That is a Democrat, I guess the tip of the spear of the Democrat Party, and just a few years ago. And that makes sense because those the leaders of Black Lives Matter proudly admitted that they were trained Marxists. It also includes the abolition of private property, and Marxists advocate for the abolition of private ownership of the means of production, factories, land, etc., and propose that they should be owned collectively by the community or the ruling government. And recently, at the World Economic Forum, or the WEF, they made it clear that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And so this is part of the leftist agenda. You also have collectivism and state control. Marxism starts with socialism and emphasizes the central role of the government in controlling and distributing resources until the state itself withers away and transforms into full-blown communism. And there's also the opposition to capitalism. Kamala Harris points out that the difference between equality, which is equal rights and opportunity, as opposed to I misspoke. Kamala Harris points out the difference between equality and equity. Equality is equal rights and opportunity, which is biblical, opposed to equity, which is everybody ending up in the same place. And I have video. I mean, she's on video making that clear. And finally, there's always revolutionary change. Marxism advocates for a revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist system. And, Marx died in 1983, but his ideas have evolved and advanced at the Frankfurt School and have led to critical race theory, which Kamala Harris is all about. And that is Marxism, by the way, and it's racism. It's judging people not based on their character, but on their race and skin color. And so she's a proponent of critical race theory and DEI, which is Marxism and racism. And it is opposed to both America's philosophical foundations and I'd say biblical theology. So I think those are big red flags that we ought to be aware of. And Kamala is famous for saying she wants to be unburdened by what has been. And that is a Marxist slogan. And what that means is to leave this capitalist, and I say America is based on a theological foundation. And she wants to leave that to go to something. And you keep hearing that turn the page from her as well. So I think there is clear ties to Marxism. Marxism has always brought death and destruction wherever it's been used. It might not happen tomorrow. It might not happen next week, but we see countless times over and over again. This should be a huge red flag when thinking about how to cast our votes.
Okay, why don't we let Randall kind of have the last word on that, and then we'll move to the questions. I want to be respectful of both of your time. So, Randall, unless you want to engage him with some more questions on that, why don't you go ahead and say your piece about it, and then we'll move on.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Braxton. I'll just give a few comments. So first of all, again, Kamala Harris's position is pro-small business. And the Wall Street Journal, which is Rupert Murdoch's right-wing Trump-supporting Wall Street Journal, just said this week, the United States has a, quote, remarkable economy. I mean, unemployment rate is about, the unemployment rate's like 3.5%, something like that. the U.S. Inflation is going down. You guys have an economy that's the envy of the world, including Canadians. So the fact that you're trying to paint her as a communist is honestly, it's absurd. Now you mentioned one thing.
I'm going to have Braxton share. We will connect that for you.
Yeah, sure. But you did mention one thing. She talks about equity. Yeah, that's part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll say this. You said that's not biblical. It's the workers in the fields parable. Everybody starts at different times. They all end up with the same thing. It's the young and older brother. The older brother doesn't work faithfully for years in the field. He somehow ends up with the same thing. The principle behind equity is there's a common illustration of equity, the principle. It's if there's a fence and there's three people that want to watch the baseball game and there's 3 milk cartons. The one person doesn't need a milk carton. He can stand and watch the game over the fence. The second person
I've seen that.
he uses a milk carton, and the third person gets 2 milk cartons because they're shorter. I don't find that so threatening. You call that communist? I think that's an embodiment of the vision of God. I mean, it's kind of like saying, to the extent that or Marxist, I should say, the extent that it's Marxist, it's kind of like a genetic fallacy, like saying, which you would appreciate this, that saying because something is Greek in origin, that means it's bad theology. It doesn't. You have to decide independently whether it's good or bad. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. Rather than worry about Kamala Harris and ill-founded concerns about communism, you really ought to be worried about Trump and crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is an economic system in which individuals and businesses with political connections and influence are favored. An example of that, Trump wants to abolish the tax system and replace it with tariffs, and he has consistently shown that he will use tariffs retributively. So in September, he's threatened John Deere, and he said, if you move your factories to Mexico, I will put 200% tariffs on all John Deere goods. That is a recipe for the corruption of crony capitalism. And an example where you see it is just in the last week when the Washington Post refused to endorse a candidate the first time in decades because the billionaire owner, Jeff Bezos, was concerned about Trump retributing against Amazon and Blue Origin if he should become president. Already, that is an example of fascism and crony capitalism. It's what Timothy Snyder, historian of fascism, says is anticipatory obedience. That's what I think you should be concerned of, rather than what I think are paranoid associations of Kamala Harris, who's very pro-business, with communism or Marxism.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I think the shoe's actually on the other foot. I think that we should take this very seriously. I've been studying Marxism. It's been a hobby of mine since I was 10 years old. And I think I wrote an entire article called Key Tenets of Marxism versus America's Philosophical Foundations. Encourage people to look at that. Also in the article I wrote with Josh, called An Open Letter to Our Never Trump Friends, and also the one, well, I would just tell people to start there. We do connect a lot of these dots, showing that it's not a baseless fear or an irrational fear, that it is justified to connect these dots. So I just point people to go to those. And to touch on equity really quickly, nobody has a problem with, can we see over the fence? The problem is, do you want somebody who is qualified to pilot your plane and has gone through all the work and is the top of his class, or do you want somebody who is at the top of his class, in fact, nearly isn't as good at all, but his skin color is different? So let's give him that job ahead of the person who's more qualified to pilot your plane. Or who do you want doing major surgery on you? I don't care. I'll tell you what, I've actually got surgery coming up pretty soon on something. I have SVT in my heart. And so skyrockets, normally resting heart rates around 60. Every once in a while, I just shoot up to 200. So I've got to have a procedure done. Well, guess what? The guy I went to, he's an African-American guy. And why did I go to him? Not because of his skin color. It's because he's been described to me as the Tiger Woods. And, just because he's the best, right? That somebody said to me, hey, look, do you want anybody in the PGA is going to be a pretty good putter. But if you have a choice to hit a putt and you have the entire PGA to choose from, if Tiger Woods is available in his prime, are you going to pick him? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, that's this guy. Go have him operate on you. I could care less about the color of his skin or where he started from or anything else. I want to know, is he the best? If he's going to operate on me, that's who I want. And equity, when we're so concerned about equity, we put skin color ahead of quality, so to speak. And I think that's a danger. So,
well, I said that I would let Randall have the last word on that, but here we are.
Sorry.
After we get into the questions, maybe Randall, if you want to circle back and say something about that, I'm more than open to that. Let's go ahead and jump into the super chats here. Rob Reed, thank you for the super chat, says, why am I labeled a correct Christian by voting for Trump when his states' rights platform legalizes late-term abortion in states that want it? Tim, you want to speak to this? And then Randall, if you want to respond, you can.
Why am I labeled a correct Christian by voting for Trump when his states' rights platform legalized late-term abortions in states that want it? So I'll say this. I've been part of the pro-life movement for decades, and we've been begging to have Roe overturned so we, the people, could continue this fight for life at the state level. Trump was the most pro-life president in the history of presidents, at least since 1973, year I was born, and when Roe came into effect. Trump did what no other president has done. He did what we were begging him to do by appointing Supreme Court justices, which is another huge reason to vote for Trump and not Harris. But by appointing Supreme Court justices who he knew and he was advised would work to get it overturned, and he was right. So Trump did the pro-life movement a huge service and finally brought it back to we the people so that we can advance this fight for life at the state level. Now, Trump advance, while they might not be as pro-life as I am, they're actually closer to you, Randall, but they have said they are going to keep it as it is and not seek to do any more with it. They want to keep it at the state level to let us, we the people, continue this fight. Harris, on the other hand, has alluded to wanting to overturn Roe and get it back to make abortion federal, codified into federal law. So she wants to take the fight away from us. Trump got the fight back to us so we could have it, what we were begging for decades, and he wants to keep it here. Harris wants to take it away and codify abortion into law. So into federal law. So there's a clear pro-choice candidate, Harris, and a clear pro-life candidate.
Okay. Randall, do you have any response to that?
I think Tim's kind of missing maybe the point that Rob is making. So as I take it, the point that Rob is making is Tim and Josh were arguing in principle against voting for a candidate that would be okay with third trimester elective abortion. And Trump is okay with third trimester elective abortion in the states that would allow it. So it just seems to be morally inconsistent of them.
Yeah, I don't think he's, I know, I'm almost positive that Vance isn't okay with that. I don't know about Trump,
then they wouldn't be turning it back to the states.
Well, I mean,
because that's what they're allowing for as the
what we've asked for years is please get it to the states so that we can continue. So in Nebraska right now, we're currently in the middle of this. By the way, if anybody's watching in Nebraska, vote for 439 and no against 439. But that's because I also think that Trump and Vance understand incrementalism. They know that if they try to go all out like my neighbors to the south, Kansas, and my friends in Ohio did, they tried to, it was an overreach. It was in principle right, but it was an overreach and the people weren't ready for it. And they experienced backlash. So these two red states, actually they lost what they were hoping. They lost it all. They went for it all and they lost it all. And so Nebraska right now is in a position where we've learned from them where we should move incrementally. And so that's why I just said vote for 434 and against 439.
You can justify incrementalism to vote for Trump, but somehow you can't justify incrementalism to vote for Harris.
Well, I think Harris is going to bring just death and destruction and so much more. I mean, we didn't even get into what they're doing to females right now, taking away female rights by putting biological males in their locker rooms, in their showers, in their bathrooms, competing against sports, women getting hurt. What about women's rights? And this is all being advanced by the modern day Democrat machine led by Harris and Walz. And so we've got abortion issues, right? And I've made the case that it is better to vote for Trump than and definitely we can't vote for Harris, but at least Trump is going to keep abortion at the states. Let us continue to fight it. Yeah, some of the states are losing, but some of the states were winning. And so there is a difference being made here. But we've got abortion, we've got the transing of the kids and the indoctrination of the kids. And you brought this up, I wanted to talk about it earlier. You said there's some severe cases. Well, then why in Hollywood is there something in the water? Because in Hollywood right now, it's so many kids. And right now, more than any time in the history of the world, the percentage of these confused kids has skyrocketed. It's because they're being indoctrinated. And one of the things that I listed on my long list of evils is, Walz he's made it such that you don't even have to tell their parents if the kids they're getting indoctrinated in the schools. And then Tommy is telling their teacher, hey, I think I'm really a girl. Hey, well, don't tell your parents and let's start this process. And so, I mean, there's just so much evil going on. We have to oppose it. And we definitely can't vote for Harris and Walz because they're the tip of that spear and they're leading.
I've got 10 minutes. So if we want to just get to other questions.
That's what I was going to say, Randall, to be respectful of the time constraint that we agreed upon. I have two other questions, if that's okay. But first, I'll just say thank you to KL for that super chat. They appreciate the dialogue. And then also we'll go to this one and we'll just let Randall answer this because it's directly to him about himself. So Randall, do you think your individual identity is influencing your position?
What does that mean? What are they asking? Individual identity.
The fact that you impact your position, Randall.
I think the fact that I'm me impacts what I think because it's me thinking it.
Okay. So yeah, well, I appreciate the super chat, Roy. All right, now from Matt Jackson, we have Kamala said equity, therefore she is a Marxist. Black Christians in the abolitionist and prophetic traditions were using this language long before Marx. Tim, do you want to speak to that?
I never made the case that Kamala said equity, therefore she's a Marxist. I've gone in and Josh and I did this in our article, connected so many dots, made a cumulative case that was part of it. And equity, however, is the platform of Marxism in the Frankfurt School. So there are these connections to Marxism like crazy. So let's see, part of it, Black Christians and the abolitionist and prophetic traditions were using this language long before Marx. That doesn't matter. I don't care where it started. It doesn't mean that equity isn't a Marxist idea. It's part of their foundation. That's what drives communism.
Randall,
everybody's going to have the same amount of stuff, right? Everybody's going to have the same ends. Everybody's going to end up at the same place, no matter how they've been, what choices they've made in life, no matter if they've handled things responsibly or not. Everybody's going to own the same amount of stuff, and that's equity versus equality.
Randall, would you like to speak to that?
Well, I would again go further than what the questioner does, or the commenter, and saying it's not only precedes Marxism in prophetic traditions. I mean, it's rooted in the Bible and the New Testament. Of course, the point is, many people have observed that Karl Marx's theories of dialectical materialism were a flipping on the head, an inversion of Hegel, who is himself a bastardization of Christianity. So it's not surprising that some of the core ideas in Marxism about seeking the just society are ideas that are sourced within the Judeo-Christian tradition. So to my mind, it's a little odd to say those things that ended up in Marxism at some point are therefore forever tainted. And again, I mean, the big thing here is Kamala Harris is behind small business. This is key to her platform, and the proof is in the pudding. The Biden administration has done.
Not there.
Well, okay, tell the Wall Street Journal that says you have a remarkable economy.
Hey, all I got.
And
it's
man,
I know you don't live here.
Principles. It's
I know you don't live here. I promise you, there's a reason why Trump is leading in the polls right now. by a small, and it's because there's so many people
He's
here.
not actually. He's not
Well,
actually. But
I
look,
mean,
here's
okay,
here's one
let's say
example.
Hold
I'll
on,
give
hold
one
on,
example and then I'll conclude. Well, I'll just finish my point. So gas right now is down to $3, just over $3 a gallon nationally on average. During COVID, the height of COVID-19, it was like $2.20 because nobody was driving and they're in the middle of a pandemic. But on multiple fronts, the American economy is doing well. You still want to do better when it comes to inflation, but they're doing well. But the main thing is, however well you think it's doing, there's zero evidence on KamalaHarris.com that she's a hidden communist. But there's overwhelming evidence that Trump disparages democracy and that he would lead to a type of crony capitalism.
Is
That's
that
what
on
you should be worried about.
Trump.com? I could
I
care
gave you
less
evidence
about
for it
what's
already.
on. I do not care about what's on Kamala.com. I care about what she said. I care about how the Biden-Harris, how they have led over the last 4 years. And believe me, I know you don't live here. My neighbors are feeling the crunch, right? I felt it, right? I make my money as, I mean, I raise support like a missionary. I've lost so much support because people don't have the money coming in that they used to have. So things are tight for me. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but for me, things have become much tighter. And I know that that's the case for so many of my neighbors. My wife is in the real estate. She sells houses. Everybody in that business is struggling right now. And it was not that way under Trump. I thought when Trump was during Trump's presidency, I was like, we're going to be rich if things keep going like this. And it is not the same. Things are so tight. So I'm just going to speak to you from experience. And the polls right now are a dead heat, right? There's the betting odds in Vegas are picking Trump right now. But everywhere else, it's just neck and neck. Well, why is it so close? And one of the main reasons why even among young black men, support for Trump is skyrocketing among them is because they're feeling the crunch and they knew they were doing better under Trump. But let me get back to Kamala Harris and her connections to Marxism.
Kamala let's Harris do it briefly if you can, Tim.
I'll make it very brief. Mm-hmm. She's literally proposing price controls on food and, real clear politics. Senior writer Mark Hemingway said this is literally what the Soviets did. And the results will be scarcity and higher costs. So inflation is going to continue going through the roof. We've got worse. The inflation here right now is horrible, and it's going to continue to get worse with policies like that. Policies that she has said out of her own mouth recently, and that she is going to seek to promote and affirm and enforce upon the American people.
Let's just do just to clarify, and then we'll close. Roy says the super chat question about your identity, Randall, was in relation to incorporating a political party into your identity. Does that clarify this to you?
Okay, I'll respond to that in a moment, but let me just respond to the price controls. So I believe that's her price gouging policy, and economists are divided over whether her price gouging policy would work. But it's not Marxist. It's a policy.
It's communist.
No, it's not. No, it's not communist. It's a price gouging policy to prevent price gouging in certain circumstances.
All right.
Now, in terms of the question or political identity, I mean, the fact that I'm a Canadian, we don't have a duopoly, so where you have to be really one or the other. And I think that the duopoly political system, Democrat, Republican, is unhealthy. I mean, I think it's much better to have multiple political parties like you have in Canada and European countries and so on. It gives you more options. It forces them to create coalitions, to learn to work together often in order to get power and so on. When it's Democrat, Republican, you're forever going back and forth between the two. And really, I mean, back in 2000, if I was an American, I probably would have voted Ralph Nader because I was just really alienated by certainly by Democrats and Republicans. So because of that, I tend to be less partisan, perhaps, and maybe that's relevant, and that the fact that I'm Canadian. Although 30 years ago, I was a big Rush Limbaugh fan, so I have changed.
Really?
Yeah,
impossible.
So yeah, I mean, just to point, if you want to say that price controls aren't Marxist, it is what the Soviet Union did, and it had a horrible impact upon their people. So
Okay,
for
so
me, that's enough to make that connection.
Well, I lived in England for a couple of years, and there were price controls on certain staple items like milk and bread, and England's not communist.
I want to appreciate that in the midst of all of this, we found some agreement between the two positions as to whether we could get out of a two-party system. So, but listen, I want to say I so much appreciate you all being here, and everyone in the chat. Thank you so much for this. Randal, Tim, both ministries, both channels, and links to their books are in the description. So I hope that you'll make use of those and follow them on Twitter. They're both active on Twitter and YouTube. I know Randal is very active on Twitter, although it takes a break every now and then, as we probably all should for mental health. And so, guys, this has been really enjoyable. I hope it's been a blessing to everyone. And I'll just close it out here. Does anyone want to say bye real quick or anything? Any last moment things? Okay.
I'll say one thing is so we are in a very highly polarized time, and the mere fact that we've had a congenial conversation, good-natured, disagreeing on very important issues, I think is itself just a wonderful testimony to how we should be moving forward on these issues. So thanks.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great conversation. I'd love to have more with you, Randal. And really, I think we discussed this, Braxton, with Jonathan Pritchett the other day too. These are the conversations that Christians need to be having. I see too many churches running away from these conversations, saying that Christians shouldn't be talking about these. And I think this is exactly what we need. So let's continue to do that, and continue to do our best to vote in such a way to love our neighbors, and while considering the greatest matters of the law, as Jesus talked about. And I think we could discuss this for hours and hours on end, but this is a good start. And so thank you, Randal.
Thank you, gentlemen. This has been fantastic. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.